When humans made their first landing on Zarnok Prime, the galaxy barely noticed. It was a standard mission: surface mapping, biological indexing, minimal contact protocol. The Zarnian Council of Elders, a proud race of tall, amphibious beings steeped in ancient tradition, approved a temporary camp within the outer fringes of their habitable zone. This was supposed to be peaceful, strictly observational, and tightly regulated. But humans, as history has shown, have a habit of rewriting expectations. For centuries, the Zarnians had lived in harmony with their world. They revered its natural cycle, respected its deadly fauna, and maintained strict cultural boundaries around regions considered sacred or cursed. None more so than the infamous Bloodgrass Valley. It wasn't just taboo, it was a survival imperative. No Zarnian ventured near it. No scout crossed its border. It belonged to something else. The creature known as the Skirl was not simply a predator. It was a planetary constant, a 9-meter tower of natural armor, coiled muscle, retractable talons, neurotoxic fangs, and a layered skull so dense it could deflect plasma fire. It had ruled Zarnok unchallenged for generations. It wasn't feared out of superstition, but out of practical understanding. The Skirl killed everything that entered its territory. Even the Zarnian grav tanks left it alone. So when Elder Vizak received a wave of distress beacons from the human camp, right on the edge of Bloodgrass, he expected the worst. A slaughter. An extinction event. A lesson in hubris. What he found instead was smoke, laughter, and the unmistakable scent of cooked meat. The Skirl's carcass lay gutted and smoking across a makeshift thermal pit. Its armor plating had been peeled off and stacked like shields. The jaws were hanging from a drying line. Its massive spine had been split, braced with salvaged metal rods, and turned into a crude rotisserie. Around the fire, 6 human explorers lounged casually. They were bruised and bloodied. Yes, but not panicked, not grieving. They were eating. One of them, a woman with close-cropped hair, hands blackened with soot and grease, looked up as Vizak approached. She gave him a friendly wave. "Oh hey, you must be Elder Vizak. Didn't realize your apex predators tasted this good." Vizak froze mid-step. His mind tried to reject what his eyes insisted was true. "You killed the Skirl?" he managed to ask. Another human, taller, with a ragged beard and a split lip, looked up from carving a chunk of meat. "It came into our camp last night, took down our transport, wrecked half the perimeter. We laid some bait, set a few charges, improvised, took it down by dawn." "You cooked it?" Vizak's voice trembled. "Wasted meat's a sin where we come from," the bearded man replied matter-of-factly. Behind Vizak, his Zarnian guards raised their electrostaves instinctively, forming a defensive line. One of them hissed in disbelief. The Skirl was sacred, not in ritual, but in reputation. To hunt it was madness. To eat it was unthinkable. "You don't eat the apex predator," Vizak said, barely audible now. The man who stepped forward next had authority carved into his posture. His name was Captain Darnell, command-led of the expedition. He was licking Skirl grease from his fingertips when he answered. "With all due respect, Elder, where we're from, if something tries to eat us, it goes on the menu." That one sentence detonated across the Galactic Union like a shockwave. By the end of the day, Zarnian Council chambers were in chaos. Uplinks to the Union buzzed with demands, accusations, urgent conference requests. Some factions were appalled. Others, particularly the Torgoth coalition, forged in fire and blood, were intrigued. They killed it for sport, some declared. No, others countered. They killed it for survival, and then they barbecued it. Across a dozen systems, the word, barbecue, was translated, debated, then requested as a cultural import. Meanwhile, on Zarnok Prime, the humans had already started preparing the leftover ribs for smoking. The next day, Elder Vizak returned to the camp with reinforcements, hoping to contain what he still assumed was a mistake. This time, he didn't raise his voice. He simply stared as the humans worked. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. Captain Darnell didn't look up from his task, sharpening a bone-bladed weapon fashioned from the Skirl's femur. "Oh, we know," he replied. "We've established dominance." Vizak's composure cracked. This was never a contest. To humans, Darnell said, survival always is. Later, Zarnian biologists examined what remained of the Skirl. It became clear that the humans hadn't simply fought it, they had studied it, watched how it hunted, timed its movement cycles, created synthetic bait matching its preferred prey, used camouflage netting, perimeter sensors, and a precisely calibrated shock spear aimed at the one anatomical vulnerability beneath its third jaw plate. It was surgical, efficient, unnerving. "They reversed the food chain," one biologist murmured. "They didn't defeat it. They adapted." The final report delivered to the Galactic Union's Xenobehavioral Division was short, clinical, and utterly chilling. "Species, human. Classification: Adaptive Apex Omnivore. Threat level: reclassified from C to A+. Directive: never assume predator superiority in a human's presence. Note: they do not merely survive dangerous ecosystems, they consume them. The galaxy could not look away. Newsfeeds spun out of control. Hashtags in dozens of languages trended simultaneously: human predators, barbecue diplomacy, Skiril Spitfire. The Zarnian Council doubled its security around human encampments. Protests flared on orbiting trade stations, but nothing stopped the flow of curious onlookers descending onto Zarnok Prime to witness, with their own compound eyes, what these primitive-looking bipeds had truly done. What the galaxy hadn't yet grasped was that the Skiril wasn't the only predator in the Bloodgrass Valley. There was something else beneath the soil, something older, something the Skiril feared. They called it the Vexorth, an ancient subterranean hive predator thought extinct for millennia. It fed on apexes. It hunted Skiril broods like rodents. The Zarnians hadn't seen one in over 600 years. But the smell of burning Skiril flesh, of bone marrow roasting in human fire pits, of charred dominance on open display, that woke it up. 2 days after the incident, seismic activity registered across the valley. The ground split open near the human camp. From the rift emerged a segmented, plated horror, 12 meters in length, hissing steam and shrieking like metal torn apart in a vacuum. Dozens of alien researchers watched in paralyzed awe as the Vexorth Queen slithered toward the humans. The Zarnians screamed for retreat. The humans, they reached for seasoning. Captain Darnell didn't wait. His team had already built crude auto turrets from broken survey drones and fabricated spears from Skiril femur. They had been watching the soil quiver for hours, studying, preparing, luring. The Vexorth surged forward, collapsing tents and smashing sensors, until it stepped into the heart of their perimeter and triggered the trap. A cascade of electrified nets wrapped its forward segments. Then came the spears, not hurled but launched by compressed gas rigs made from deconstructed atmospheric pumps. One pierced the creature's throat gland, another the ovipositor, the third, driven by Darnell himself, sank into the central nerve spine beneath its armored ridge, the weak spot. The Vexorth Queen thrashed once, twice, and then fell still. The crowd stood frozen, a dozen alien species unsure whether to weep, flee, or applaud. Captain Darnell wiped ichor off his face and turned to the visitors. "She's got a gamey smell," he said, "but I think we can smoke it low and slow." The war-hardened Torgoth delegation applauded. The insectoid Kesseri began documenting recipes. A Zarn diplomat vomited from sheer cultural shock. And within the hour, humans were carving the Queen's flank, rubbing in spice kits they'd 3D printed on the shuttle, and taking orders. Someone from the Union's culinary diplomacy wing live-streamed the first bite. Viewership shattered records across 12 planets. The Zarnians, once horrified, now stood silent in reverence. Elder Vizak approached slowly, his voice no longer condemning but shaken and curious. "Why do you eat what you fear?" Darnell looked up from his cutting board made of armored carapace. "Because that's how you stop fearing it." "But these were gods to us," Vizak whispered. "Apex lifeforms, sacred." "We don't worship predators," Darnell replied. "We study them. And if they try to make us prey, we flip the equation." Zarnian scientists scoured the humans' battlefield turned barbecue site. They found layered footprints where the humans had mapped the Queen's movement. Traps woven with Skiril sinew. Chemical bait synthesized from alien mosses. Notes carved in stone. Contingency plans in case of failure. These weren't savages. These were omnivorous tacticians with a cultural reflex for dominance and adaptive culinary instincts to match. The Galactic Union's Xenocultural Board convened an emergency reclassification hearing. Earth's representatives arrived with appetizers. The formal document read: Updated species status, Homo sapiens sapiens, behavioral summary, cross-cultural adaptive predator, social code, ritualizes dominance through consumption, psychological profile, apex flipping opportunists, threat tier, A+, advisory to all apex class civilizations.
Engage with caution, hospitality, and snacks. Note: human diplomacy may begin with a handshake, and end with a marinade. Back on Zarnok Prime, the human camp expanded, not militarized, just reinforced with solar smokers, pressure cookers, and a surprisingly advanced spice hydroponics bay. Aliens from across the quadrant began arriving, not to negotiate peace, but to try the meat. The Vexorth Queen's hind flank, marinated in mango iron blaze, was declared transcendent, bite-born food prig. The Skiril tail sausage caused 3 plebeian monks to renounce their ascetic vows, but not everyone was celebrating. In the shadowed zones of uncharted systems, apex predators stirred. Something primal echoed through the biosphere of worlds that once ruled by claw, toxin, and tear. They felt it in the stars. A new apex had arrived, not one that roared, one that ate. By the third cycle after the Skiril incident, Zarnok Prime had transformed. Where once stood a quiet human science outpost now rose a sprawling hybrid settlement, half laboratory, half open-air kitchen. Smoke trails from thermal grills mingled with the misty atmosphere. Alien dignitaries arrived daily, not to protest, but to sample. What began as a diplomatic scandal had mutated into the galaxy's first xenogastronomic tourism boom. But the humans weren't hosting a dinner party. They were preparing for war. A war they didn't start, but had already begun to win. From the edges of the uncharted systems came whispers. Worlds that once ruled uncontested by instinct and strength now pulsed with unease. On the volcanic planet Naxor-5, a telepathic predator swarm known as the Valkyran absorbed the memory of the Vexroid Queen's death. On the oceanic moon Dawara, a 100-meter-long apex leviathan stopped mid-hunt to listen to the psychic echo of its cousin's bones being boiled into stock. Something unnatural had entered the galactic food chain. Something tool-using, fire-wielding, and insatiably curious. For the first time, apex predators across the galaxy felt fear, not from a bigger fang or a stronger claw, but from a species that wouldn't play by the rules. One that turned every threat into a meal, every enemy into a recipe, every failure into an upgrade. On Zarnok Prime, Captain Darnell and his crew weren't celebrating. They were reinforcing their perimeter, sharpening steel bone knives, and mapping migration patterns of larger, unknown threats moving toward the planet. This isn't about food anymore, Darnell said, cleaning a marrow striker. This is a dominance cascade. Elder Vizak, now far more student than judge, nodded solemnly. They're coming, aren't they? Darnell didn't look up. They are, and they won't be curious. They'll come to put humans back in the cage. Back where they think we belong. What will you do? Darnell smirked. Make sure the cage is lined with barbecue pits. Elsewhere, at a secret war council orbiting Great Rodactune, apex species began to coordinate. The Velv, Kram, the droid behemoths, and the Lythari stock queens entered alliance for the first time in recorded history. Their goal, eliminate the human strain before it spread. But it was already too late. A research vessel on Tyr'Vok-3 had been overrun by human exoscouts stranded during an FTO engine malfunction. Instead of dying, they domesticated the native carnivores, built underground smoke dens, and restructured the entire predation hierarchy in 3 weeks. The once deadly crachal shriek beasts now served as hunting dogs. The apex arachnid, once considered unkillable, was being served tempura style with alien citrus reduction. When the droid behemoths sent an armored scout party to Tyr'Vok-3 to observe, they were horrified to find the food festival in full swing. Humans had built competitive cook-offs, invented 3 new sauces, and were teaching planetary children how to gut clean the crachal for maximum tenderness. And this wasn't isolated. Everywhere humans were dropped, abandoned, or accidentally left behind, ecosystems didn't collapse. They evolved around humans. They bent to human hunger, recoiled from human invention. The food chain itself was no longer vertical. It was circular, and humans stood at the center. Back on Zarnok Prime, Vizak sat beside the fire, quietly watching Darnell skewer a fresh set of tentacle meat strips onto a grill carved from old survey drum plating. This wasn't your plan, Vizak said. To remake our world. To remake any world. Darnell nodded. We didn't come here to conquer. We came here to survive. We just happened to be very good at making that uncomfortable for others. Silence lingered. Then Vizak asked what many in the galaxy had begun to fear. And what happens if you ever decide to stop surviving and start hunting? Darnell didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply turned the meat once, gently. The fire cracked. We don't hunt for sport, Elder. We hunt for necessity. But if necessity knocks, he let the sentence hang in the smoke. Galactic broadcasts reported rising panic. One segment aired a compilation of human dishes prepared from apex species across 12 systems. It ended with a warning in flashing crimson. Do not engage humans at predatory level. Their survival instincts are culinary weapons. Interstellar Apex Risk Council, Emergency Bulletin 2172A. Meanwhile, on a rogue planet drifting between systems, a creature older than stars began to stir. It had swept through empires, devoured gods, and silenced suns. It tasted fear in the galactic current, but also something more intoxicating. Challenge, and it moved. Across the stars, planets fell silent, predators paused mid-hunt. Apex species instinctively stilled. Something ancient had stirred, not a creature, not a machine, but a force shaped by evolution into the purest expression of biological supremacy. It had no name, Only a designation whispered by the few civilizations that survived its passing. Designation: Echelon Class Apex Entity, codenamed Valkyrie's Prime. Its arrival was not announced by transmission thread or declaration. It simply appeared, a black mass the size of a small moon, gliding silently across the void. Its body was a fusion of armor, flesh, and neural lattice. It consumed suns to warm its blood. It had never been defeated. It had never been challenged. Until now, Zarnok Prime, the once quiet scientific outpost, now bristled with energy. Earth's forward scout command had dispatched reinforcements, not with orbital cannons or battleships, but with fire pits, trap engineers, culinary anthropologists, and survival tacticians. Because humanity had read the signs. They'd seen the tremors in the biosphere, heard the shifting frequencies, calculated the mass approaching, and instead of evacuating, they dug in. They set the table. Elder Bizak watched as the humans transformed their camp into something between a tribal fortress and a culinary wazir. Trenches lined with carbon fiber skewers. Perimeter sensors recalibrated to detect pheromone waves. Smoke vents laid in patterns designed to confuse olfactory tracking. It wasn't just defense. It was an invitation. Captain Darnell walked the inner ring slowly, inspecting bait placements. A series of thermal effigies laced with fragments of apex remains from 12 different species. "He's coming, isn't he?" Vizak asked, his voice brittle. Darnell nodded. "Oh, he's already here." Above the planet, Valkyrie Prime descended. Its brightly crushed satellites into spirals. Its tendrils breached atmosphere like meteor trails. Every creature on Zarnok Prime, from sterile hatchlings to blood-breath serpents, retreated underground or died instantly from the pressure field. But the humans didn't run. They cooked. Valkyrie's Prime landed with sound of tectonic plates streaming. The sky turned red. Zarnich's moons trembled. Its body, a pulsating continent of teeth and muscle, unfolded on the valley's edge. The air warped with heat and dread. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in psychic broadcasts, projected to every sentient mind across 500 light years. "You have violated the order of ascent. You feed on dominance. You are an anomaly. You will be unmade." Captain Darnell stood calmly at the center of the camp, a steel-toothed dagger in one hand, a smoker control in the other. He didn't respond with words. He pulled the smoker's lever. Spice meat aromas, apex flame with iron-rude blades, spread like incense across the battlefield. Valkyrie's Prime trails. Across the galaxy, those watching the livestream from secure observation nodes saw something they didn't believe possible. The apex hesitated. Its head-like protrusion tilted, scent receptors twitching. It advanced slowly, not with rage, with curiosity, and that was the track. Phase 1. Engagement, complete. Phase 2. Fracture. Explosive tipped skewers buried in the soil burst in synchronized sequence, severing primary mobility tendrils. At the same moment, high-frequency sonic pulses targeted the apex's nerve web. Identified by Earth biologists who had long suspected multi-node apex predator shared pattern vulnerabilities. Phase 3. Bleed. The humans, already armored in thermal plating, launch onto the massive creature's body like ants, injecting cryosaline and incendiary broth into open wounds, carving through armor with tongue steel. Blades. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. Valkyrie Prime fresh, but the terrain had been reshaped. Narrow paths, hidden spikes, misdirection sent walls. It couldn't orient, it couldn't focus, and worst of all, it couldn't understand. It had faced entire war fleets, binary weapons, suns-fired bullets, but it had never faced species that studied taste before attack. In just under 11 minutes, the galaxy's most feared predator collapsed. Not out of pain, not from injury, from psychological submission. Humans didn't just fight it. They reduced it to a meal plan. The final cut, a clean stroke beneath the apex's thorax ridge, came from Darnell himself. He stood over its slowly cooling mass and said nothing. He didn't celebrate, he didn't posture. He simply opened the data pad and typed a single entry. New classification. Apex tier defeated. Protein yield. 62,000 metric tons. Smoke level. Medium. Potential. Endless. Across the Union, silence reigned. Then came panic. Then came surrender.